Welcome back. Now let's move on and let's look at things humanitarian. Tomorrow, August 19th, is World Humanitarian Day, and it is held every year to pay tribute to aid workers who risk their lives in humanitarian service and to rally support for people affected by crises around the world. This year, the theme is #NotATarget. The idea is to continue to bring attention to the millions of civilians affected by armed conflict every day. People in cities and towns struggle to find food, water, safe shelter, and their fighting drives millions from their homes. Children are recruited to fight, their schools are destroyed, women are abused and humiliated, and humanitarian workers deliver aid and medical workers treat the wounded and the sick. They are directly targeted as threats and prevented from bringing relief and care to those in desperate need. The Deputy British High Commissioner to Nigeria, Harriet Thompson, is our guest, and she'll be joining us from our studio in Abuja. Good morning, Harriet.
Good morning. Sorry, I can't see you, but thank you very much for having me here this morning. Thank you.
Well, we can see you clearly, and we thank you for joining us this morning to look at this issue, which is a very important issue, especially as you consider what we have in the northeast of Nigeria, which has been going on for a few years. So humanitarian workers are doing all they can to bring solace to the people who are going through all this suffering in the northeast. Now, let me start by asking you, how many, or should I say, how large is the humanitarian effort which you have from within Nigeria?
It's very, very significant. There are great needs in northeast Nigeria. We estimate that there are around 7.7 million people still in need of urgent humanitarian assistance. And just recent figures that we've had, there's always a lot of uncertainty around the figures in these sorts of situations, but it appears that of the people who've been coming out of previously inaccessible areas since July, up to approaching a half of those people are suffering from acute malnutrition, and as many as 1 in 5 are suffering from severe acute malnutrition. So the problem in the northeast of Nigeria is very, very serious, and as a result the humanitarian efforts underway up there are very, very serious as well. The UK alone, between 2017 for the next 5 years, will put in £300 million worth of humanitarian assistance, and we're one of a number of international donors, as well as the money that's coming from the federal government of Nigeria to support that vast effort. So it's very, very important work. The scale of the work means that coordination of those efforts is absolutely critical and is a great challenge. But today, on World Humanitarian Day, we take a moment to remember the principles behind humanitarian assistance, and those are humanity first and foremost, impartiality, neutrality and independence. So the people who are working up in northeast Nigeria, as well as in many other conflict zones, areas of crisis across the world, they are providing need to people purely on the basis of need. And also today I think it's important that we remember and that we rally support for, as you said when you opened, those people who are affected by crises right across the world. So a really important day, lots to think about today.
Yeah, it's #NotATarget. Can you just explain that to us?
Yeah, so it's very, very important that humanitarian workers are safe and secure in their work. They risk their lives going into areas that are not safe. And it's very important that they are allowed that access and that they are not targeted. The principle of neutrality is a very, very important one. We saw earlier on this year in Ran in northeast Nigeria, humanitarian workers killed when Boko Haram attacked their base in that town, and that is unacceptable. As I said, these people are risking their lives in order to save lives, so for them to be targeted is totally inappropriate. Human life is sacred, and that's the principle behind humanitarian workers' day-to-day jobs. That's what they're there to do, protect the sanctity of human life. So for those people to be targeted by either side is absolutely unacceptable. We've seen some quite worrying rhetoric around humanitarian workers and the international NGO community, the domestic NGO community who are active in the Northeast. And that's worrying for us because we absolutely have got to have the support of those in charge of the areas where these humanitarian workers are trying to save lives. For people to be raising doubts about what those folk are doing there increases the risks that they're facing and makes it less likely that they will be able to provide the essential food assistance, nutrition assistance, access to medical care, protection that people living in zones affected by crises desperately need.
You know, you talked about humanitarian workers going to conflict zones and the fact that they need to be protected and not be targeted. Beyond Nigeria, there are other conflict zones around the world. But I'll use the figures from Nigeria, where at least 3.9 million people are considered food insecure, and more than 400,000 children suffer from severe acute malnutrition. On this day, this humanitarian day, what do you think can be done to make it a little easier for both the humanitarian workers and those that need this aid?
So I think one of the most important things is for the various people who have a role to play in protecting these people to coordinate how they play that role. And I say that coming back from my degree. I was up there earlier on this week speaking with some of the people who are involved in trying to bring the crisis in northeast Nigeria under control. So I was speaking with the military, with the civilian state authorities, and with some of the humanitarian community as well. We need those various different bodies to be acting in coordination with each other. If you take a look at the northeast of Nigeria, for that crisis to be brought successfully to an end, we cannot rely on any one of those sets of bodies or institutions or individuals to bring about the solution in and of themselves. We need the military to be providing the security. We need the humanitarian actors to be going in and provide the immediate life support that people who've been living in that conflict zone need. And then we need the state authorities and the federal authorities to come in and start re-providing the services. Now, all three of those things need to happen if the situation in northeast Nigeria is to be turned around. So the coordination between those actors is absolutely essential. They need to be talking to each other, and they need to find a way to communicate with each other in language that they all understand. Different people use words to mean slightly different things, so they need to find a way past that so that they know they're talking about the same thing, they're on the same page, and they have a coordinated plan for how each of those different sets of actors will work in concert in order to bring lasting peace and lasting security to the northeast of Nigeria.
Now, how much of this cooperation are you getting from these three agencies to help and make your work easier, or make the humanitarian work in the northeast easier?
Yeah. So the UK government is putting, as I say, £300 million into the humanitarian effort for the 5 years from 2017. As well as that, we are also working with the military, we're working with local NGOs, we're working with state government and with federal government to see how we can support that holistic effort. Over the coming years, what we would like to see is the coordination become much more effective between those different sets of bodies. Now, this has got to be Nigerian-led. This is not something that the UK or that any other member of the international community, any of the humanitarian organisations come in and say, this is how we do it, this is the plan for northeast Nigeria. It's Nigeria who needs to lead this solution. So first, as a first step, for example, really making those coordination meetings at the very local level, at the state level, and then at the federal level, effective and efficient, with a clear plan that all of the various actors are working towards. We think that would have a huge impact on the effectiveness of the struggle in northeast Nigeria.
Humanitarian work is voluntary work, isn't it?
Or some it's not always voluntary, so some is voluntary, but otherwise there are humanitarian workers who work for organisations who will pay them to do that work.
Okay. What is the situation like in Nigeria? How much involvement do Nigerians have in all of this?
There's a great many Nigerians who are active in the effort in northeast Nigeria. I can't tell you the proportions, but I've seen for myself huge numbers of people who are involved in food distribution, provision of medical care, provision of protection services, and in the great effort that it takes to coordinate all of those different actors who have a role to play. It's a huge operation, and the logistics are massively complex, and then the Nigerian people involved at every stage of that operation. So I don't want people to think of this as something that the international community is providing to Nigeria. Nigeria is simply a recipient. Nigeria is absolutely contributing